But yeah, now it's time for a review of Blonde, which is well, it's one of the most, if not one of it is the most divisive and controversial film released this year that I've seen. It's one which is, Twitter and social media has been in uproar about it. There has been debate. There has been harsh criticism of it, and some few critics actually did enjoy it and things like that. But because basically what Blonde is it's an adaptation of a book of the same name, which by Joyce Carol Oates, which is a fictitious reconstruction of Marilyn Monroe / Norma Jean's life. So it's to get that out of the way, and I think this is a major problem that people are sort of maybe expecting going into this, is that this is a true to life biopic of Marilyn Monroe / Norma Jean's life. It is not, absolutely not. There is. This is a biopic. I mean, we did our biopics episode ages ago, months ago, didn't we, Gonzalo? And this is definitely on the more experimental and psychological character study biopic that is taking a real life figure and it does depict some real life things that did happen, of course, but really looks at the psyche of the character and
the same way you would if you did a biopic on, I guess, like Julius Caesar. Like, you'd probably hit some of the famous points, but everything else you fucking make up, kind of. Yeah.
But even with some of the famous points, like some of the movies being made and like premieres and things like that, there is definitely more of a lot of fiction, a lot more of experimental filmmaking going here, and it's very akin to last year's Spencer, which took the life of Diana Spencer. Sorry, I forgot her name for a second. How could I? Princess Diana's and it covered like 3 days of her life, which was completely made up. I mean, who knows if any of that could have ever happened? But really,
there was also like a lot of backlash for Spencer as well, because a lot of people went in thinking it was a straightforward biopic retelling, where it was very much an experimental horror movie. Actually,
it was a ghost story. Really, I mean, that was a film which looked at just the sort of the psyche of Diana and sort of took real life incidents and real life facts and her feelings
to inspire
during her life at this time, to inspire and sort of uncover like what was she feeling during this time. And this is very similar to that, I will say. But
it's interesting because I've heard more, like the only reason I've heard about this movie is the controversy around this movie.
Yes. So basically, going in looking at it purely as a biopic is probably a futile effort. This is not covering. This is not a documentary. This is not a book. This is not something that is covering. It's not like Elvis, I guess, which is a film which sort of was a celebration of that man, and just kind of hit the beats. Hit the the iconic beats of his career, and then it ends with his death, of course. It's not a traditional
that's
biopic.
More of a stylized Wikipedia article.
Yes, pretty much. Like I said in that thing, and even with that, because I think people are already having a problem with this film because it's not one that truly celebrates her achievements, Monroe's achievements, like something like Elvis. Just it's purely a celebration of that man. But I think that film falters by not, challenging
the faults of the human,
its central character and its faults of Elvis. I mean, we talked about how it completely overlooks his relationship with Priscilla, who he met when she was 14, and more uncomfortable subject matter because it was a film trying to celebrate the man. And I guess it's a different biopic. There's nothing really wrong with that.
Like Robert Downey Jr.'s Chaplin, which is very much these are all the fantastic things that he did throughout his life, and again ignoring all the horrific things that also happened. It's more of a celebration of a figure. Sorry, yes.
Yes. No, I've already sort of skirted around this without actually going into it. But really, within the film's opening sequence, Andrew Dominic, who directed the film, and also he's done strange biopics in the past, which are more like psychological and really fictitious, like the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, I think. It's a really long title. I can't remember if it was Robert or something else. He's done like that, and Chopper as well, which is a very strange biopic with Eric Bana.
The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. There you go.
Thank you, I was right. But, but already from the opening, that you already get this is not a normal biopic. It's strange. It's experimental. You have photographs that talk while a lone figure sits at a piano, and and soon after a fire is raging indoors, but the neighbors don't seem to notice that there is a fire happening next. Like, they open the door and there's a fire there, and they don't seem to see it. You already know something. This is not normal, and that sort of experimental energy carries on throughout the film. This is a film which shifts from black and white to colour on a dime, just sort of randomly. Occasionally you'll be like, okay, we're in black and white now, we're in colour. Aspect ratios change all the time. You have these fluid dynamic cuts which goes from like a sex scene which is actually shot through abstracted reflections of metal, which then goes into an orgasm, which then cuts and fluid cuts into a waterfall, which is then the film Niagara starring Marilyn Monroe. Really interesting and strange directorial choices, which I think work for the most part, but there is somewhere I think he takes it too far. But at the centre of this, you have an Ana de Armas performance which is really transformative and really brave, a really, really strong performance, and one of the best of the year so far that I've seen.
Wow.
I mean, you have someone who's not just she's playing Norma Jean, who's playing the icon Marilyn Monroe, who's then in some sequences is playing a character. So you have Ana de Armas, who's playing going to different layers of a character, which is really impressive. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, and it's more than just impression as well. Like it's a really interesting performance, but I think the film's greatest strength is its depiction of Monroe as something otherworldly, a person that actually did not exist. And I think this is the really interesting part, is that Marilyn Monroe didn't really exist.
No, she wasn't real, of course.
And I think this comes down to, if you're trying to do a Marilyn Monroe biopic, this would be the problem. Because Marilyn Monroe is already is not just a pop culture icon of timeless stature. She's someone who meant so much to different people and different people at different times, whose life is already still kind of, even though there's countless books and stories written about her, there's still so much that is unclear and still mysterious. And I think trying to tell a truly honest biopic of her life already invites challenge, because there's so much interpretation surrounding her life already.
Yeah.
But with this film, Monroe
it's kind of honest that he didn't even attempt it. Yeah.
Yeah, Monroe is an otherworldly figure who literally, in a point in the film, has to be summoned by Monroe and her makeup artist, who someone's like, she's coming, don't worry, she's going to be here soon. Really eerie and creepy stuff, by the way, which we talked about the psychological aspects of Don't Worry Darling last week, but this is the dark stuff that I kind of wanted to see in that film.
I'm excited.
Where actually a film like Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me was even evoked in this, where you have like a shrieking and really operatic main performance, as well as like there's some really eerie scenes which reminded me of Lynch and that film. But Monroe is something that's sort of created as an entity, as a means to survive and progress in a career, as someone who is sort of the centre of the ogling of men and is completely objectified,
like
and
both,
the male gaze.
Both a survival mechanism and a sickness.
Yes, really. Something that she has to become in order to, sort of dupe men and studio heads into, giving her parts and things like that. Because there's a really interesting scene where early in her career in this film, I've got to always put in caveats in this film.
Yes.
She is auditioning for a part which she feels really connected to. It's a mentally ill character, because her mum was mentally ill, and that's actually a true fact of real life. And she felt connected to this character, and you have this great scene where Ana de Armas is, play as Norma Jean, is giving this really, revealing performance and a tear-jerking one at that, and she's just reading the lines and reading the script with a screen partner, and then she's asked to leave the audition, and once she leaves the room, the men immediately turn and go, "What the hell was that? What was that? Like, why is she acting like a mental patient, even though that's sort of the character description?" And then they ask one of the studio heads, "Oh, what did you think of it?" And he just immediately goes, "Would you look at that ass?" Like, that's what he takes away from it. And that's the whole thing. Like, every guy in this film is painted as someone who objectifies her, or someone who can't love her, or doesn't really understand her. And I think that's also true to the real life person, is that she was someone who was misunderstood, someone who was purely loved on a superficial level, but never truly loved. And I just think that objectification stuff, and there is a lot of, nudity, there is a lot of sex scene, there is, depictions of abuse and rape. It's really heavy, heavy stuff. It's a really dark and sad film, but it's a tragedy at the end of the day. And look, I understand people have big problems with these sort of things, but I think they're saying it disrespects Monroe, and I don't agree. Not only because this isn't a real thing, and okay, people might go, well, why even bother using Monroe if it's not a real story? But I'm like, yes, but using someone of the stature of Monroe, who also went through these horrible traumatic events, was still able to have one of the most iconic careers in such a short amount of time, is something beyond astounding. And I actually think a lot of the things people have problems with, like the objectification stuff and the abuse things, is something that not only makes her, in this film, makes her a really tragic character, but also acts as a great companion piece to her real life films, and something where you watch this and go, wow, she went through all this horrible stuff and was still managed to achieve these great films, and was an immense talent. It also helps that this film is gorgeous to look at as well. It's beautifully shot and has the best score of the year by
That's a claim.
oh my god, I forgot his name there. Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, which has I've actually, there's the last track of the film, where when the film ends, which of course ends, spoilers, Marilyn Monroe dies, and it ends on that note, and you have where the credits sort of rush to. It's basically, the end credits aren't just darkness, it's like the stars and stuff like that. It's, of course, she was a star, and it's like, that's how the credits are unfolded. It's like the credits are going through the stars, and there's this great piece. I can't remember the name of it now. I have to actually look at the soundtrack. There's this great piece. It's called A World of Light. There you go. Of course, you're looking at stars. A World of Light.
Yes.
That is just so transcendent, and that score sort of plays throughout the whole film, and it's just, and at perfect points as well. The score becomes really haunting and really uncomfortable and eerie, especially in film, in moments where the iconic scene where, like, you see her dress get blown up, which is, an iconic image. Everyone has seen that image of her dress being blown up by the subway grate. Instead, that moment is depicted as something really eerie and quite haunting, because you then have, it's all done in like slow motion. You get these close-ups of these slobbering, sweaty men, and it's all played with this great score. And it's a genuinely,
because
I'm gushing over the score, but it is a really fantastic piece of music.
I wanted to ask you, because you've said that lots of people seem to be having an issue, and I've heard this with like the idea of the objectification in this movie. Do you think the film does a good job of putting you in her shoes as the victim of this objectification, or do you think it falls short and like objectifies her accidentally while trying to talk about her objectification? I mean, you've already answered, but
I know. I, like I said, I think the objectification stuff is done in a really, in some cases, really disturbing and like a really creepy sequences, and it's obviously just reflective of the men that are obviously,
But that's the thing. Does it make you
as purely a
participant? Does it make you a participant in that objectification, or does it make you does it make you complicit in it, or does it make you a victim within it? If that makes any sense.
I think definitely the latter. I think a lot of people will disagree with that point. People think it's objectification purely for the sake of objectification, but it's sort of like you said, with sort of this Inception quality to it, where it's like, she was an objectified sex icon, was Marilyn Monroe. but I think the way it's done, especially like the sequences I just said, but I think people are sort of getting hung up on perhaps there is a lot of nudity in this film, and perhaps people are, well, that's not necessary in some things, and like the rape sequences. There is two main scenes. I mean, one is short and brief at the start, which is her being raped by a studio executive, and then one later on in the film. But what it does, it's interesting because within the second one, it then becomes sort of out of body experience, where then Norma Jean's sort of reflecting on who is really doing this right now. Is it Marilyn? Is it Norma? Is it something else? It becomes a really sort of, it's cerebral and sort of psychedelic, strange experience for the viewer.
Yeah,
and I think because I think purely
to,
for me, why I don't think it's objectification just purely for like I'm not a participant in it is because the depiction is always shrouded with sadness or pain, and pain is a major aspect of this film, and I never felt like it was being used to arouse. There's actually only one consensual sex scene in the film, and it's a really actually, because look, people can argue about what is the necessity of sex in films. You know, that's an age-old question, really. But there is this really important sex scene which happens sort of earlier on in the film, where it's Norma Jean feeling comfortable with these men and feeling comfortable that she can open up sexually with them, and it's something that acts as, you know, like something that completely juxtaposes the other sequences of sex in the film, and it's like, well, that actually really meant something to her as a character, and whereas the others were, you know, not consensual. But look, there is, no, I would say, like,
because that's interesting, because like I recently watched Fleabag season 1, and it's really interesting to me
great
how sex is portrayed in that specific show. Like the idea of portraying sex in a way that is incredibly not arousing in any word. It's never like you're looking at a sexy scene. It's just sex is happening. You know, and and it's one of those things. And again, I know this is a conversation we would not be having if Cal was here, but the way sex is portrayed in films, I feel like we're subjected to a lot of just flat out objectification of sex, or even just sex as just like this is as arousal, basically, like the idea of this is supposed to be arousing, this is supposed to be aesthetic, this is supposed to be, and it's interesting to like try to understand how to portray something that is inherently sexual in a way that condemns it while portraying it, you know? And that's what I was wondering to see your opinion on, because again, like the main thing that I've heard about this film is the controversy of it, and I feel like it like, if what it wanted to do is put you in her shoes, make you understand what she was going through, like a way of not shooting it and like filming it in a way that isn't arousing, but the complete opposite would be very very effective. Whereas I don't know, you have like Zack Snyder, for example, in Watchmen, shooting the rape scene, absolutely horrifying, because he shoots it as if it was like a consensual sexual scene where he's trying to get you to objectify the woman that is being raped at that point. And I was just wondering, like, I was wondering, because I haven't seen this movie yet. I want to watch this movie, but also I know it's going to be emotionally very scaring, because I'm still rattled from Don't Worry Darling, and you thought that was light. So
no, I will say, look,
so,
I have said, and I think, look, I've discussed in what is in this film, this is a really dark and heavy film, and that is like, if I've just described to you, you hear these things, and you're like, well, I really don't want to see that, then it's completely understandable that you wouldn't want to watch this film. But for me, I think this story being one about pain and trauma and fame and the all that, the sacrifice and horrors that come with that, and just sort of demonstrating this in a really stylish, fascinating. Like, it's a really, really interesting way in which Dominic has put this film together. And I will say, though, some of the creative decisions do not work. There's certain things like returning to like shots inside the fetus and POV shots inside a vagina, which really didn't need to happen. There are certain creative decisions which I think he does take it too far and sort of is distracting. But overall, I think the creative decisions are bold and effective. And I really don't see this as a film in which, you know, it is hard because, look, this was a real life person, and I understand people. Course, I understand people getting up in arms about your main character in this fictitious film was real, but like I said, I think the main way to take away from it is that, one, this isn't a true to life biopic, and two, what this does, the true painful and traumatic life of Monroe is demonstrated here, and one that acts as a great companion to her works and makes her just a really astounding and brilliant figure to me, and I think honestly, that's my biggest takeaway from it.
Yeah, like the theme that the movie seems to be going for, to me does not seem disrespectful in a way. For me, it's all about the execution. That's why I'm griping as much on that. Because again, I haven't seen it yet, and it's going to be a while till I sit down to watch it, because I do not expect to come out of this film feeling great about myself and ready to do other things.
But I do think it is a really effective piece. I know people said they couldn't watch more than a certain amount, or they felt disgusting after it. I felt really quite moved by it, actually, and I was really quite sad by the end of it. And I think that was I think it is an effective piece, and it is almost 3 hours as well. It's a long film. It's 2 hours 40, which is oddly, I think, about the same length of that Elvis film. But I think this is a far riskier and more daring film than that. I don't know, that was a random comparison, I guess, just because they're both 2022 biopics. But
but anyway. But also they're both about like two very kind of like comparable figures. So I understand that.
But yeah, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. That is my final score for Blonde. Some people may hate me for that, but
reviews.
Hey ho. That's how I feel about it. But anyway,
that's after all.
That is our unwanted opinion after all. This really,
exactly.
This may be the end of unwanted opinion. Who knows? Maybe I'll get stopped after this. But look, that will be the end of today's show, and thank you very much, Gonzalo, for joining me on this World Cinema
It's been an
episode.
absolute pleasure, like always. Honestly, I come out of this review, like I hope many of our listeners, with two new movies that I want to take a look at. So,
But yes, on next week's show, we're beginning the horror movie season, as it is October now. Halloween season is approaching, but we're still going to keep it a little bit light next week, because we're going to be talking about comedy horror films, some of our favourites and some best we can recommend. Hopefully Kyle will be back for that. I'm sure that'll be his kind of episode. But yes, guys, please follow Unwanted Opinion Podcast on Spotify and on the YouTube. Everything you do will help the channel. And also visit unwantedopinion.net right now, because there is now new articles, a full written Blonde review if you want to really dissect what I've got to say about it, and also a September review roundup for the rest of it, including After Yang. But yes, we just gave our opinions on our world cinema and Blonde and After Yang. But at the end of the day, those were unwanted opinions. Thank you very much.